The wind on the ferry deck was wild that afternoon, the kind that carried stories no one had the courage to tell. Tourists were scattered around, leaning on the rails, snapping photos, laughing away moments they would forget by next week. But in the midst of the noise and motion, there was a stillness, an island of quiet that seemed to resist the rush of the world. It came from a girl seated in a worn wheelchair, her fingers pale and thin against the metal armrest, her eyes tracing the ocean's edge like she was searching for something she was terrified she'd never find. And then, with a voice softer than the waves below, she looked up at the men in the tailored gray suit standing beside her, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, and asked the words that froze the world around them, "Sir, can you lift me up to see the sky? If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts." His name was Marcus Hale, a man whose life had been shaped by deadlines, skyscraper offices, and the constant pressure to perform. People respected him, envied him, feared him, but no one really knew him. He preferred it that way. Vulnerability was expensive in his world, and he'd long stopped paying for it. The ferry ride from Seattle to Bainbridge Island was his rare escape, a place where he could quietly breathe for 30 minutes between meetings, deals, and responsibilities that felt heavier than the briefcase he always carried. But on that particular day, Marcus noticed the girl the moment he boarded. Something about her stillness, so different from the restless energy of the crowd, caught his attention. She wasn't wearing the hopeful smile people with disabilities often forced in public to make others comfortable. She looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually, like someone who'd spent too long fighting battles no one else could see. Her name, he would later learn, was Hannah Pierce, a 17-year-old whose legs hadn't worked since the accident 2 years ago. A drunk driver had stolen more than her mobility. He'd taken away her plans, her identity, the life she once believed she'd have. Marcus found himself standing near her without knowing why. Maybe it was the way she kept watching the sky, like it was a friend she missed. Maybe it was the shadow of loneliness he recognized because he carried the same one. Or maybe it was just fate, disguised as coincidence, nudging him toward someone whose life would end up changing his in ways he could never predict. The waves slapped against the ferry hull, gulls circled overhead, and families chattered in the background, but Hannah's voice cut through the noise like a fragile thread seeking connection. She asked him if he could lift her, just for a moment, so she could see the sky unobstructed by the people crowding the rail. It was such a humble request, but her eyes held something desperate, something pleading. She wasn't looking for charity. She was looking for a moment of freedom. Marcus felt something inside him shift. He wasn't the type to involve himself in strangers' lives. People always wanted things from him, money, influence, opportunities. But Hannah wanted something simple. Something profoundly human. Without speaking, he slipped off his suit jacket, handed it to a nearby bench, and gently slid his arms beneath her fragile frame. She weighed almost nothing, but to him she felt like the heaviest truth he had ever lifted. Hannah's head lifted toward the broad, open sky as Marcus raised her high enough to see over the railing. Her breath caught, and for a moment her eyes shimmered with something bright, something like hope trying to relearn how to exist. The wind tangled her hair, the sun brushed her cheeks with gold, and it looked like, for the first time in years, she remembered what it felt like to be unbroken. Marcus felt his own breath hitch. He hadn't expected this moment to dig so deeply into him, but it did. Watching her gaze at the sky with that trembling smile, he realized how long it had been since he'd felt awe. Since he'd slowed down. Since he'd cared. He didn't know her story yet, but he could feel that she carried pain like a second spine, something that held her up but weighed her down at the same time. When he gently set her back into her chair, Hannah blinked back tears and whispered a thank you so sincere it sent an ache straight through his chest. The next 30 minutes on the ferry were unlike anything Marcus had experienced in years. He found himself talking to Hannah, first out of politeness, then curiosity, and finally, genuine care. She told him about the physical therapy sessions that had become more about maintaining hope than making progress. About the dreams she used to have of becoming a photographer. About the nights she cried herself to sleep because even the stars felt too far away. But she told him with a strange sense of acceptance, not bitterness. Like someone who had battled darkness long enough to earn the right to talk about it without shame. Marcus listened quietly. His life of numbers and negotiations felt embarrassingly hollow compared to the resilience she carried. He told her, in return, about the weight of success, the loneliness of leadership, the pressure to constantly appear strong. He admitted he'd forgotten what it felt like to feel anything deeply. As they approached Bainbridge Island, the sun dipped lower, washing the horizon in soft pink shades. Hannah looked at Marcus and asked if he ever regretted anything. The question hit him harder than he expected. There was one regret he kept buried, the day he canceled a trip with his younger sister because of work. She had died in a sudden medical emergency the next week. He never got to say goodbye. It was a wound time hadn't healed. Hannah didn't say anything. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his, her fingers cool and delicate, but carrying more empathy than he had felt in years. It wasn't pity, Marcus would have recoiled at that. It was understanding. It was human connection. And somehow, it was exactly what he needed. When the ferry docked, people rushed off in their usual hurry. Marcus stayed with Hannah, offering to wheel her off. She hesitated before telling him her mother was waiting in the parking lot. But then she asked if he would walk with her to meet her. The question surprised him. She had known him barely half an hour, yet she trusted him, maybe because she sensed the goodness buried under his tired exterior. Her mother, Caroline, looked startled when she saw her daughter accompanied by one of the most recognizable CEOs in Washington. But when Hannah explained, Caroline's eyes softened with gratitude rather than awe. She told Marcus her daughter rarely talked to strangers, let alone smiled at them. She thanked him for giving Hannah a moment that mattered. Marcus watched them drive away, feeling something heavy unhook itself from his chest. But he thought that was the end. It wasn't. A week later, as Marcus prepared for a board meeting, his assistant buzzed him, saying there was a letter addressed to him with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, one Hannah had taken with her mother's phone. It showed the sky from the ferry deck that day, brilliant, open, endless. And beneath it, she had written 3 words in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Marcus." He read the letter twice, and for the first time in years, he closed his office door and allowed himself to cry, not in sadness, but in release. Over the next month, Marcus found himself making quiet adjustments in his life. He took more breaks. He spent time with his family. He visited hospitals, donated to rehabilitation centers, and even set up a scholarship fund for young artists with disabilities, anonymously, because he didn't want recognition. He just wanted to honor the girl who reminded him that even broken wings could still point toward the sky. But life can be unpredictable. 2 months after their encounter, Marcus received another message from Caroline. Hannah had undergone a complicated surgery, a final attempt at repairing nerve damage. The outcome was uncertain, and she wanted him to know because Hannah had asked for him before going into the operating room. Marcus arrived at the hospital as fast as he could, his chest tight with fear. When he reached her room, Hannah was pale but awake, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She smiled when she saw him, a tired, fragile smile, but real. She couldn't move her legs yet, and the doctor said recovery would take time, but there was hope. Real hope. Marcus stayed with her for hours, talking quietly, letting her rest when she needed. When she finally drifted off, he looked out the window at the night sky, remembering the moment she had reached for it, wanting nothing more than to feel its freedom.